how they heal according to progress. So giving people more options with how they want to heal with any struggles, especially in the area of hearing voices or having visions. And of course, a large part of that is spirituality. A lot of folks that kind of flee the pathologizing and medical model that's really dominant here in the States are looking for a more spiritual approach. So that's kind of those conversations and those strategies that we've seen work here, what I'm hoping to contribute and also learn from all of you and bring back to my community.
Thank you.
Hi, I'll go next. Yeah, I'm Steve Hill from New Zealand, Auckland, New Zealand. And my background is I spent a few years writing a book with another guy, or actually a program around self-intelligence, which is around bringing self-awareness to people and tools to manage that. Later been involved more in, after 10 years of that, which is around positive psychology, more into therapist-based work in the area of breathing and how to breathe, but not just breath work, also linking in the psychological aspect of the mind in relation to, I suppose you could say, psychoneuroimmunology or probably, yeah, psychosomatic events that people have. And so currently working on developing, because we are in lockdown, pivoted to develop online products with groups of people that I'm surrounded by, because I've worked in so many, with so many different people now that are also practitioners, is what I mean, to bring them together to create like a wellness portal. And currently from the Indigenous perspective, working on developing with the work that I do and the journeys, which are semi-shamanic, I would say, that we take people on for healing, integrating our own like Māori Indigenous music to guide and transport, transform, shift people through those types of journeys, integrating it with storytelling as well, narrative. So that's kind of where I'm at the moment.
Okay, thank you, Steve.
Okay, I am Pierluigi Latuada from Italy, Milan. Now I am living in Switzerland. I am doctor, psychotherapist. And since 1982, I had my first experiences with Brazil and the shamanic tradition of Brazil and all the Amazonian part of South America. And I developed in that 20 years, since 82 to 2002, a methodology, a psychotherapeutic methodology that is called biotransenergetics. And there is a lot of resonance with all the indigenous tradition of healers and shamans, but also there is an integration. And so this is a place to be, I guess. No, so thanks to John to invite me. I have now, I lead, I am a president of Eurotas, that is now is called, that is the European Association for Transpersonal, that now this year goes global. So the name now is Global Network, Transpersonal Global Network. And I have a training in Italy that is accredited by Minister of University. So I am training psychotherapists in that methodology that is so linked with traditional shamanic healing and spiritual traditions.
Okay, thank you.
I can go next. I'm Julie. I live in London and training to be a therapist and also doing a degree with the Swedenborg Open Learning Centre, and really interested in the spiritual meaning of visions and soul communication in episodes of psychosis.
Thank you.
I'm Margie Meady, and I'm up in Kodiak, Alaska.
Margie, you're breaking up. Maybe you can introduce yourself in the chat.
Quite a long time, kind of balance in.
Thank you. Sana, would you unmute?
Am I on mute?
Oh, you are. I can hear you.
Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Jana Marovic. So I'm a clinical psychologist and transpersonal therapist from South Africa. My interest in transpersonal has been around for many years, 30 years. And my interest in indigenous psychology started in 1990s when I was working for 10 years in a hospital that was dealing with indigenous population. Then the last 20 years I've been developing trainings in transpersonal psychology, and then I started establishing training that is bringing psychologists and traditional healers together, like a cross-cultural psychology training. And then also I have interest in somatic psychotherapy. I'm also president of International Transpersonal Association. So that's quickly all that's relevant.
Okay, thank you, Zana.
So, so I can be heard, no?
Yes, yes.
So I am Soumitra Basu from India, and I work with the interface of consciousness and psychology. So something that you can include in transpersonal perspective, you can include in an integral perspective. But me and my colleague, who is a psychiatrist in USA, Michael Mayovich, we have come up with a model of consciousness-based psychology, but that's basically based on an spiritual perspective, an Indian spiritual perspective. And some of the key features of that is that the truth of the being is something not behind the ego, in a fourth dimensional principle, which is our beyond ego principle. So going to the fourth dimension means a difficult thing, because you have to gather all the parts of your being around something which is deep inside, or something which is your soul entity, and which can come forward and can also replace the ego. That's one thing. And the other thing is that this consciousness-based psychology, with the model with which I work, is based on the vision of a great Indian mystic, Sri Aurobindo, and who has given also an entirely new perspective of an evolution of cognitive consciousness, which in India was very new, because in India we always had that from the mind you can go to the supreme, to the great void, to nirvana, to the Brahman, to the great, what you call, to the absolute. But then there was another path that was unfolded, where newer and newer levels of the what you call the mind, which were not unearthed before, they could be brought into being, so that one could reach the highest creative consciousness. So that is one thing, but that is a very great aspect. But very practically, we work with consciousness, different levels of consciousness in our being, and also we also include the occult. The occult also we include, but not in the sense of in India that occult is usually practiced at the level of at a very lower level of consciousness and force. This thing which is very similar to what we can call as black magic in the West, something similar to that. But we do not work with that. We also we work with the higher occult forces, which is not black magic but actually white magic. It's different. It's different. There's a force of transformation from above. It's working with light, So that also is a very powerful thing that can be brought down, and it can be, is I think we have, the time is now ripe for it to be brought into our psychotherapy so that it can give us guidance. So a lot of new things that can come up with the interface between consciousness and psychology. And it has a lot of, because it has been taken from very ancient Indian spiritual perspective, has given roots, but then we also include all the modern things can be placed in the proper perspective there. And there is something for the future, which is the unborn future, which has not been there, but which where we can go. So it's something which is a very total and integral in its perspective. So that's why I say that we could call it transpersonal, we could call it integral, but it includes the indigenous, it includes the modern, and then it goes beyond to the future also. So that's it. Thank you, and thank Natalie and Joe. Natalie especially, because for her I came to this group, and Joe very much because of his great enthusiasm that we are all here.
Because of Joe. Thank you. Thank you. Myself, I'm a medical anthropologist, and I've worked in Africa and in India and spoken to Dr. Basu before now. And I'm very interested in how we can create a bridge between the therapies that we've got and indigenous therapies. What can we do? Now, as a group, we've already shot the agenda out the room. So we can have a look at it for 1 second and then we'll go back. What we wanted to do is, did we want the meeting recorded? Who's going to keep notes, but it's okay if the meeting's recorded. We kind of need volunteers for an organising committee, and who is going to hold the vision. And then the kind of products. And I think what we've covered with everybody is what products are already available. What do each of us do? What skills have we all got? And then are we going to offer online workshops and train in institutions, and who will do it? Papers for quarterly publications, who will do the work? Transcripts of case therapies, and then hybrid theory building to therapy practices. Who would do podcasts and make a film, and who would do the cross-cultural research? Now, we've already heard from everybody what each of us can do. Is there any way that we can go further by joining together with each person's skills? What do you think, Joe?
I guess it's how people feel about the vision. Like, how do they see it, and do they resonate with each other, and what are people's goals, and whether there's resonance there. And then when that's sort of clarified, I feel then it can become clearer what the next steps are. Do it in an organic way.
Yeah, because I watched a little bit of the program before that Gabor Mate ran, and he had 4 Indigenous speakers from Canada and from America, and it was obvious the way the people were talking, the hardship and the trauma that these people had experienced, that is only just starting to be acknowledged, sometimes hundreds of years later. And I don't know how can each of us work towards, with what we do, with the skills that we've got, work towards acknowledging that and offering the skills.
So just something we see in the States here, there's such a clear distinction between like medical approaches and spiritual approaches. There's very little of a spectrum or fluidity. And so very often my community in the Hearing Voice Network is asking us, which therapist would you recommend? You know, who can you recommend? that is going to take a different approach with me and kind of work with it in the style that I want, which is spiritual. And the difficulty has been actually building a network, and how do we even, validate somebody and say, oh, this person. So when you were just talking about this possible workshops, possible training, and we could say, oh, this person is certified in a program that we trust, that we have faith in, actually means they know spiritual approaches. What I can contribute is referrals from my network, from saying, here's a program I trust, they're going to do spiritual based therapy. And I wonder even if that could be expanded. There's so many people I know that go for Reiki, that go for other spiritual, they see spiritual leaders, they go to psychics who may or may not help them with clairaudience. But if we could just say, hey, all these people that are touching base with spirituality, there's this program and we trust it. And if you're certified in this program, we trust you to hold a spiritual space in work. I could supply clients essentially.
Doesn't the Hearing Voices Network already do that? Maintain a list of friendly. Steve, I mean, you would know because you know your sister who runs it in New Zealand. It was my impression that they have a list of Hearing Voices friendly practitioners.
Yeah, they do. I mean, I need to speak to Adrian more about that, and I can find out. But there's these kind of limitations too, because of I suppose similar to what Dimitri is saying, is that on one side you've got medical, on the other side you've got spiritual, energetic type work, and on the medical side, usually, to have any influence, it's got to be science-based rather than. In many cases, except for people like, as we know, Lewis, Whittemore and others, where they have been respected in the sense of their ability to use spiritual type work to be able to diagnose or to help with the recovery. So this is one area that I see, and I've always believed that as much as the medical side of things has its own value, there's a lot that people are finding aren't helping them. And so for something like what we're proposing, in many ways, is to bring a lot of validation, or even not so much validation. Well, it is validation, but this isn't woo-woo. So how can we also bring these case studies of people that we work with, and to show that from an Indigenous perspective, aligned with, as Lewis holds the two-eyed seeing, how do we bring that in to bring validation to show actually we have another way that brings the best of both worlds that is going to help to transform and heal? Because I get people coming to me that have been like, I've been working on this for 20 years. I've been to all sorts of specialists, and I think there's something wrong with my brain. And this is one guy, and I'm like, well, we spend time together, and I help him to realize that it's actually not just a physical thing, it's a psychological thing. And then the lights start to come on with them. So for me, it's almost like I like the idea of where we're going to create something that is rises above everything else, in a sense, not from an ego perspective, but from a healing. Yes, we take the best of both worlds, we understand them, and we can validate what we're looking to also provide towards others that may not have originally, well, it was originally, but more recently been accepted within the mainstream. If that makes sense.
Thank you.
I think it's very hard because the mainstream doesn't like to relinquish control, and it's just I understand what Dimitri is talking about. That in one of our goals in Maine is to create an alternative to psychiatric hospitalization for tribal members that is compatible with long stay and minimal or no drugs and involvement of traditional healers and culture. We're opening a center for a center like that for substance use problems mid-October, and we hope to have one for an alternative to psychiatric hospitalization open by October 2022. We'll see how it goes. We have a genius fundraiser, so I'm counting on her to come through for us.
That sounds good. Thank you, Lewis. My feeling is I'd like to work with psychiatrists like Sumitra Basu and Michael Miovic in order to have both sides of the bridge, because I thought it might speed up the understanding if we have sensitive mainstream medical people as well. Does that sound too radical?
No, it's great.
Sounds awesome.
Natalie, I just want to talk a little bit about, you were mentioning Indigenous and you were talking about the trauma in Indigenous. What I hear is that some people have certain interests, some people have other kinds of interest in terms of Indigenous. So I think my question is also perhaps that we need to also define a little bit about, maybe you were talking about what each person can do. To me, it would be a question what each person, what kind of interest in Indigenous, because this is what this group is supposed to be. From what I understood, we're trying to connect some kind of transpersonal or spiritual perspective and bring Indigenous. But I think the question is, in which way are we going to bring Indigenous, and what is actually, for each of us, what is relevant? Because we come from very different spaces. So like, for example, I had two colleagues of mine which are clinical psychologists, and they're both traditional African healers, and they made a contact because they heard of my transpersonal training and cross-cultural training. And what they wanted to speak to me about is, how do they practice, if they come to my training, would they be able to practice as traditional healers while still being clinical psychologists? So the question there was relevant in terms of the fact that, Indigenous healers are, and I think Natalie's talking a lot about separate categories. You have doctors working on one side, then we would have psychologists, then you have traditional healers. No one is connecting with each other and trying to find out, can we do something and can we do it together? So I think your point, Natalie, is very valid. And for me, what was interesting is they wanted to find a way or umbrella under which they can practice what they do is psychologists, but bring their spiritual, which would be African traditional healing, into the clinical psychology work. And at the moment, it's a bit tricky because ethically that may be a problem. So for example, that could be an interesting conversation about how can we help. Like for me, I would like to help colleagues like that, because I would like to make sure that Indigenous healers, in fact, and their perspective becomes more included. And then the question is, what other people would like to do in terms of Indigenous.
We get around that by our traditional healers will fit under the rubric of peer counselors or peer providers. It does get dicey when one has a license and wants to also do traditional medicine. And so for me, when I do traditional work, I don't charge or bill for it. So that I can't say that that entirely protects me, but it partially protects me. It's complicated for sure when we're dealing with legal entities, the state.
Yeah, thank you. And I feel we have a particular position which may not be so much in India, except of course for colonization by the British and whoever else. But in other countries, there was systematic regarding people as second or not quite human. And it's been going on for hundreds of years. And it's how do we acknowledge that at the same time as practicing our therapies? And there are cases, I know I've heard in California, there's a clinic where they work with the Vietnamese people and the medical people. And again, in Brazil, the psychiatrists work with the psychic healers. But they're just pockets, and I don't know how to, or if we want to make it much more widespread than that.
I agree with Zana. I think we should focus a little more what does it mean for each of us to work with indigenous and bridging this indigenous tradition with transpersonal psychology or mainstream? Because I guess all of us has experience more or less and already did a lot of work, maybe some of us. So we should focus, I think, and also we should do a sort of check of the state of the art. What we have done until now, not to collect maybe something works or so, no, to see from which starting point, no, would be and to go where. Because, for example, I spent my last 40 years working on this, and I had all my process of mythologize indigenous tradition, then be deluded by them, and then try to manage the relationship, and then try to help them, and then to realize that we can't help them. And so there are a lot of, there is a lot of issue in it. It's not so easy to say, okay, we work with indigenous tradition and transpersonal. So we should focus, I think.
Yeah, I feel from my side that of things is I love the indigenous wisdom and many of the I suppose some of the old practices that have had such amazing effects with people, from whether we might say psycho-placebo or whatever it might be, and towards the healing. But it's that bringing together, like ultimately we're all indigenous to this planet, if we go beyond a traditional culture, right, where we've been even in New Zealand, we've got little subcultures of Maori in New Zealand, and they may have different beliefs depending on where they have evolved within the island. And so for me, it's kind of like, rather than almost indigenous, it's Western versus people who are indigenous to this planet, right? And there's this Western mindset that has been prevailing that has been more or less focused on a holistic approach towards well-being and what are pillars that potentially when you look at an individual, you can work through those pillars to determine perhaps what the first domino effect is to help them towards healing. And so by understanding that there is this need for a more holistic perspective around whether it's looking at the spiritual, looking at the psychological, the physiological, or whatever it is within a being to help them to heal. Everyone suffers similarly because we're all humans. The difference being that we have a different belief system depending on where we've come from. So by providing this to everyone, but having templates that can be interpreted more into traditional cultural. So for me, it would be, okay, yes, I do my work for all people, but I want to merge that into the Māori traditional belief system as well, because I know that by adjusting it and using their stories that they have been emerging from, their mythologies, that it's going to have a greater impact. Because when we look at the Western world, we've got people who are mixed traditional cultures, right? Like myself, I have about 10 different bloodlines of different cultures. And so I'm a mongrel in many ways. But there are ones that stick out for me more than the others. And so there are many people who are lost with their tradition, is what I'm saying. And so by bringing in something that they can aspire to can be very helpful to transform, to take them into these more transpersonal places.
Thank you.
I would just add one or two things. One is that you see that there are also signs of change even in the mainstream. For as Michael always points out, that you see psychotherapy in the USA going more towards mindfulness, meditation, and other techniques. Actually, it is all clinical Buddhism in practice. What you are seeing now today in the USA, all that Freudian and all those stuff, nobody talks about them. So it's more about, you see, the variants of CBT that are happening, or the mindfulness meditation. They are just what you call clinical Buddhism, if you say. So that a stage is coming now where the acceptance of an integration of what you call truths from different things, different indigenous and different systems, they can be integrated. So the stage is coming. You have to wait for the stage to come. Suddenly you couldn't introduce unless the mind changes. And today with the shift from postmodernism to post-postmodernism, and the shift from linear thinking to circular thinking, which is happening in the global mindset. So a stage is being gradually set. And why I'm telling this, that when I present our consciousness model to mainstream people, I always tell them at the beginning, because I know there will be antagonism or there will be surprise, or there will be that rigidity, how to break from the mainstream. So the first thing that I always tell them, that we are presenting a model which you can use independently. But if you are very much in your mainstream things and you don't want to open up, but still you can take some light from this system and use that light in some level of consciousness. So might be so that I have also I try to construct that model in such a way that even if someone is working with some mainstream theory, some light he can take, that therapist can take and apply at one level of consciousness. At least at one level, some light can be taken and the horizon can be expanded. So if one is too much focused on the unconscious, one can also train oneself to go to the cosmic consciousness or to the super conscious, or likewise at every level you can expand the horizon or go to your inner being, go to your subtle levels from the gross levels, and we encourage them to do that. But for that you have to do it in a very convincing way. You have to give them case studies. As you said, that you need more workshops, you need to have more interactive programs, and you have to show them with case studies and other things that this is possible. For example, occultism. You see that I try to say that occultism in psychiatry, then people will, the mainstream people, they will get what you call get shocked. But if you can give them convincingly with case studies that such things are, you can see things from a different level. Might be that you will not go straight for an occult therapy, but you have to acknowledge that there is an occult level that is also happening. And occult, what you call work that is an occult phenomenon that is also occurring behind an presentation, a clinical symptom. So first is acknowledgement of that. For that, we have to have good level of case studies. We have to use it in a very convincing way and in a language where they will understand. So we have to devise all these kind of things. I think that our interaction has to be designed in a way. So there's time will come. The time is going to come when these things will be accepted. You see, the global mindset is changing. Today, people are reading Harry Potter. 20 years back, reading Harry Potter would have been, people would have laughed. They would have scorned at you that you are reading all nonsense. But today, people read Harry Potter, nobody minds because the mind is wanting to get truth from all sides and from the occult, from the magical. So that is also acceptable. So now things also have to change. We have to be optimistic and we have to design our things in such a way that we can be presentable to people. So we need new types of workshops and new kinds of what you call interactive programs and all, which we have said that the products who will do them. So these kind of things we need.
Thank you. And I can see it's a problem from when I've been teaching in medical schools for 15, 16 years. And the way that I manage it is I'm talking about this ethnic group and that ethnic group and their beliefs about reality and health and mental health. The issue comes that you can't do that anymore because there's so many people of all ethnicities who are hearing voices and having visions. And so I did it for 15 years and I knew what I was doing in order to get the ideas to medical students. But it doesn't work where there are so many people who have those kinds of experiences. I can mention inequalities. I can mention the way different people were treated. And I'm lucky that in the UK, in that particular medical school, the students are from many different cultures and countries. And so students can say, oh yes, my grandma did this or my uncle did that. But it's not good enough for me to have one Natalie going into medical schools. And I don't know what to do to make it wider so that we somehow use the expertise of everybody here and become at what point do we become political? I mean, I'm not a political creature, but at what point do we stand up?
Sometimes it's not that we have to stand up, it's the people that have done things that we've done things for stand up for us. And that's because of the proof of concept of the, you know, how well we have been creating change. And so therefore we have support by that community as well, rather than just ourselves. But yeah, it does go into, especially into the clinical side of things, there's a lot more strength required in there for support. So it has us having the right influences on board.
So at least here in the US, like even if you have great advocacy and the government passes a resolution or whatever it is, there's so much bureaucracy and so many gears that it still doesn't create real change. It just is just another thing that you could point to and say, hey, we have this. But I've seen that like where real change was created was when you just change the incentives for the people who are on the front line. So like, you know, you have people that are, if you have a way to protect therapists, who want to include spiritual approaches, protect them both with credibility, where they have studies they can point to quickly to defend their approach, protect them legally where they need to, you give them the answer to. And other than that, you just give them the incentives to be trained in this, saying like, hey, this is going to be good for both the impact you want to create and, your own bottom line. Then we have a lot more people doing it. Then you start getting more of these case studies. Then you get the heroes rising that want to take it to the next level and, create meta-analyses and whatever it is, or however the field advances. But I, at least over here, I don't believe that the government passing some resolution or a big bureaucracy like a hospital passing a resolution, I don't see that creating change as much as just individual people in the field saying, oh, this is a good skill for me to have and to become good at.
It's like Max Planck said, change occurs one funeral at a time.
Yep. That's a bit too long for me, Lewis.
Well, I just want to say I'm going to have to go pretty soon in 12 minutes, but I mean, I'm certainly open to continuing to meet with you guys and to offer, I like doing podcasts and giving talks, and I'm grateful to Joe for finding some interesting venues for me to give talks, and I'm happy to talk about what we're doing in Maine anytime, because we are at the interface of conventional medicine and traditional healing, in how we're approaching public health among the 5 reservations. So I'm pretty much maxed out on what I can organize. I mean, I'm happy to be plugged in and give a talk or give a training or do a podcast. I have a podcast. I'll interview any of you if you want to be interviewed. Just email me. Things like that. So that's what I got.
Include that, and then include that in like a newsletter, like once a month or every 3 months, what people are currently doing. And then there's links and ways of getting in contact with people.
I like that idea. Yeah.
I'm happy to write something, but I personally could not do one more editing job at all. I'm saturated, but I could write an article once a month about what we're doing, our trials and tribulations. Actually, I could get colleagues to help me do that.
I think it would be helpful because it shows people that there's so much going on in so many different areas, and somehow maybe a newsletter could normalize what we're each doing and make other people feel brave.
Well, I think there's an important aspect to the more that we write, the more that we publish, the more it seems mainstream. And it feels like it's going to take forever, and maybe in the sense of the length of our lives it will. But I think there's a point, to just putting it out there and just to keep putting it out there and see maybe we just have to do that and not be so worried about the outcome, because the outcome may be long after we're gone. But we have to, begin somewhere and lay some foundations.
Yeah.
I was just going to say that sounds political to me. So I see being political. That you're sharing.
Medicine is very political. I mean, medicine and psychology are incredibly political by their very nature of being, of having regulatory bodies, and by having groups of people who decide what's best practice and what's quackery. having ways that your license can be removed. I mean, all of that's highly political.
Natalie, can I ask if you, I really liked Pierluigi's point in terms of like we're now trying to figure out what's the next step. So I was thinking what he was saying, you know, that if each person, I mean, we have a lot of connections, but if we make it a little bit more visible, meaning if each person writes what they have done and what's the kind of area of, like now Luis was talking what he does and what he would like to do. If each person can actually summarize that, and then also in terms of what we were discussing, what kind of indigenous or what is actually your interest in this group, so that we can maybe figure out when that's together, we can figure out how we move with that. You know, who can do what, because your agenda is very practical, but personally I can't figure out how we would do that at this particular point. We would need to structure something before we can answer some of the questions that you pointed in your agenda.
Yeah, we are on the same page, I guess, Zara. I think that this is a very important point you wrote down, but before we have to see who we are and what we have to offer and in which kind of direction. So maybe just focus on 2 or 3 questions that each of us will answer. For example, which is my intent in doing this work, which is my vision on bridging indigenous tradition with transpersonal so, and what I can offer, what I did already. Maybe if we answer to 3 questions, each of us, maybe you know better what to do.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea to have some kind of structure that we can each start with, because I don't know about anybody else, but my hair went white a long time ago and I'm not getting any younger. And I think it's important that we, and in my day, we all had to specialize. And I'm a generalist, and I think we need not to focus. Somehow with specialization, we focused excluding society, excluding community. And I think on the one hand, we need to say, like you suggest, yeah, those kind of simple questions that we could each work towards and produce something of what we've already been doing. And it may help people who are younger say, yes, that's the ground theory, that's what we can build on. What do you think, Joe?
Sounds brilliant. I can see that developing a shared vision, and then people are bringing themselves into it and what resonates and what the focus is and how it can all connect together.
Yeah, so we're not trying to reinvent the wheel, each one of us. We're just saying what we've done in answer to particular questions, and then give other people confidence. I mean, I've worked as a freelancer for decades, and so it hasn't been so important if my thoughts or teachings were too radical. But for people employed within the system, they need to be able to quote us, each of us with our different peoples that we work with.
Let's mention one of the things that I'm with the shared vision idea and everything is, and I like what Lewis said earlier about how they're working on a project that is looking at longer term, because from what I've learned is that from a Western model, it's very much how soon can we get things fixed, but and I know from that story of that young woman you told me 8 years ago, Lewis, that you just read her stories, and after a year she started to come right. I still remember that really well, and it's and combining that, helping to re-educate the healing model around that it's never going to take. It may not take. It may take longer than what we think when we're helping and working with people, but using like the model of which I see this in biohacking, I see this in dementia, I see this in what do we call it now? Integrated functional medicine. This understanding of different pillars that form a foundation of wellness. And we have that Te Whare Tapa Whā in New Zealand, which is based around that too. And when we look into that holistic approach towards someone, then we may also need to look at this group to go, well, do we cover these areas? What are those areas to start with? Do we cover them? And is it, once we have covered them, does that provide us with a really well-rounded platform to provide or create programs to provide perhaps governance towards others who are doing something similar, because we have that there? You know, what is that was that just another part of it as well, part of the vision?
I'm sorry, I also have to jump off. It was really great meeting all of you. I'm happy to answer those questions. I think that it's a great idea. Yeah, I'm sure we'll be in touch in the future. Thanks again to Joe and Natalie for organizing this.
Okay, thank you, Dimitri, and thank you, Lewis, because I think you've each got 1 minute to go.
Yeah, time for me to go. So keep me posted and I'll keep coming and we'll keep talking and that will be good.
Yeah, thanks, Lewis.
Thanks, Lewis. See you.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
So, Joe, where would you like to go for the last 10 minutes?
I'm thinking, in terms of action, what could each person provide or suggest that they can bring to this? We've spoken about the newsletter and maybe what someone could provide with this. And then also, I've heard things around workshops and also case study transcripts. I'm wondering where that could lead.
I could look at a template for a newsletter. That would be helpful.
Yeah, that'd be really good. Yeah, thanks. Maybe a newsletter.
And we've got Pierre's questions here. I've sent them to your WhatsApp. What is my intent? Which is my vision? And what I already did. And that would start collecting what it's possible to do.
That's a really good point.
Maybe it's good time to also figure out, like some timing, so we're not, that we decide when would we meet again and how we're going to move with those questions.
When should we meet again, Joe?
My feelings either in 3 months or 1 month, but I suppose it depends how busy people are and how they want to approach it.
Could we get 100 words from each person according to those 3 questions? No pressure.
This will be fine.
I think it just then the newsletter could be promoted with everything each of us are doing, so that people can build on that rather than start afresh.
And then we can correspond through email, a group email in regards to that. Yeah.
Put it on Google Docs again, would be good. Everyone put 100 words on there.
A Google Doc.
Google Docs.
Maybe that would be easier, wouldn't it? Rather than whoever's looking after things to be scavenging emails around to put into one document. So yeah, maybe someone says, does everyone use Google Docs?
I've used it before. It's been really good. It's helpful.
Yeah.
Very.
Like we did with the bios.
As long as I'm not using it.
You don't use it, Natalie?
I've got elderly eyes.
Oh. You can magnify the screen, you know.
Yeah. You've got to have the brain alongside as well.
You remember though, Natalie, we did use one. I think we did a meeting and then we had some correspondence through emails, and people are just emailing their skills and their experience. Do you remember?
Oh, yes.
And you could just click on it. It was just quite straightforward once it was set up.
Okay, you can set it up. I can't.
Yeah, so well, I'll find out how to set it up. And then
My skill set is making tea.
So is it just a matter of setting up a Google document, a Google Drive folder? Because I can set that up. It's pretty easy.
Yeah.
That'll be good.
Brilliant.
Thank you, Steve.
Yeah. And I'll just share it with everyone. And if anyone's having problems, they can give me a call or something, you know, or email me or whatever, message me. That's fine. So I'll set up a document with those questions on.
For the next meeting, for some reason I'm thinking January. I don't know how that resonates with people. Is there any other dates that would suit people?
3 months' time.
I don't mind 1 month or 3 months for me. I don't mind. Really depends on how fast we want to move things along.
Yeah, I like fast, but I don't like lots of emails. But if there's one document that everybody can fill in.
So what I'll probably, I should have everyone's email addresses because I'll need their email address to be able to share with them the document. But that should be in that email that you sent, Joe, is that right? That had everyone's,
yeah, everyone's in there.
Yeah, cool. It is, okay. So if I have any problems, I'll just send you an email, Joe.
And there's another thing I was going to bring up potentially is I was talking to a guy called John Wilson, and he does online events of like therapy and counselling. And I was talking to him about the possibility of doing like transpersonal indigenous therapy workshops, and he seemed open to this. So this could be something to bring up as well in the Google Docs and emails to see if he could facilitate something, because he works very much like with therapies like existential therapy, person-centered therapy, CBT, and with that, and it has that kind of audience, those kind of people who attend, then it raises awareness about what else is out there. So it's alongside these approaches. That's not something separate. It's something that's part of something. It's all encompassing almost. It's almost suggesting something holistic without being holistic almost. That makes sense.
Yeah, I try, as long as for me, I try not to do anything that is trauma-based online, of course, because you've got the patient, the person at the other end, and they might break down or something happens and you're not there with them, right? So for me, I'm working on in the online space, more positive ways for people to, how can I say, empower themselves to be their own healer in a way, or to know which directions to take. Or for me, say if it's around the breathing side of things, which covers so many areas, I don't focus on trauma-based breathing online. I'll focus more on uplifting. So working to help people get into more of the light spaces rather and be drawn out of the dark spaces, which can be good initially to help with recovery too. So, but yeah, to do an online workshop, I would steer a bit away from that just in case. Yeah.
Makes sense. Looking more towards growth rather than trauma. Then that's better contain it, or to that stability, that network of keep you grounded.
Yeah, and people come along to a session for just to give you an example. And we talk at the start and they're like, oh, I just feel like I've got so much stress and I've got anxiety and I've got all these things happening. I don't know what to do. And so I take them through something that is and give them tools that they can empower themselves with to uplift them. So it's just like having a medication that might uplift them. But in this sense is breath work. So therefore I'm not having to worry about that, someone going screaming or things emerging from them that I don't have the ability to be there with them to hold that space more in depthly. And I feel that's, if we're doing online stuff or online workshops, we really have to consider those types of aspects and how far can we go. Whereas, yes, when we bring it offline and we meet people in person, we can go more deeper into those spaces to help shift the causative effects of what's really going on within them.
Makes a lot of sense. Like ethical practice and also I imagine it might fit in with being accredited, or like to make it actually demonstrate the integrity of what's being done.
Okay, so Joe, what are your closing words? Because I'm aware it's almost midnight in India.
Oh.
It's like he's wide awake anyway, Sumatra, aren't you? Huh? Too many coffees today.
Well, there's thanks for everyone for coming. It's been a real honor for everyone to come together, and I just feel there's so much here that there's so much potential, so much growth that can come out of this. And what feels right to people is just following that. That's how I see it, and connecting the dots and pursuing what feels right.
Okay.
All right, thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Nice to see everyone.
Thank you, Joe, to inviting me
Thank
and
you. Bye.
to all of you.
Yeah, lovely to meet you all.
Yes, thank you.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.